My name is Dana Whitman. I'm 25, living a quiet life in Houston, and I honestly believed I had finally stepped out of the chaos I grew up in. That belief shattered at 3 in the morning when my phone exploded with nonstop calls buzzing so violently it jolted me awake. Half conscious, I picked up expecting some kind of real emergency, only to hear a frantic voice demanding not explaining. Your sister is in the hospital. Austin General. Send $20,000 right now or she'll suffer through the night. Do it, Dana. Don't make this worse. The words were sharp, rushed, and strangely scripted, like someone performing panic rather than actually feeling it. No details, no clarity. Just money, always. Money. Even through the fog of sleep, something in me clicked. This wasn't worry. This was entitlement wrapped in urgency, the same pattern I'd been pushed into my entire life. The pressure built rapidly on the other end, as if transferring that amount in the middle of the night should be as casual as turning on a light switch. They didn't ask if I was awake or safe, or even capable. They assumed I'd obey. They always did. But not this time. I took a breath, felt the anger settle into something steady, and answered, "Try calling your golden boy instead." Then I ended the call before they could recover. No explanation. No guilt. Just silence. I flipped my phone to Do Not Disturb and lay there staring into the dark, knowing that line had finally been drawn. If you've ever been treated like the family backup plan, stay with me, because the real shock wasn't that call at 3 a.m., but what came after sunrise from someone I never expected. Before we move on, hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment everything unraveled, because the next phone call didn't come from my family. It came from the police. Morning crept in slowly, but the moment I opened my eyes, the peace I wanted didn't exist. My phone was stuffed with notifications, the screen glowing with message after message, each one more accusatory than the last. It felt like they had all decided I was guilty of something before even knowing what had happened. As I scrolled, my sister's social post appeared next, one vague line suggesting that family can be colder than strangers. It didn't say my name, but she didn't need to. Everyone who knew us would understand exactly what she meant. I locked the phone and exhaled, trying to keep my mind from spiraling. I made myself a cup of coffee, hoping the simple routine might anchor me, but my hands felt stiff, like my body hadn't fully caught up to the morning. Before I took the first sip, my phone rang again, this time from an Austin number I didn't recognize. Something about it made me answer. The man on the line introduced himself as Officer Brennan from the Austin Police Department. His tone controlled and measured in a way that made the kitchen seem suddenly smaller. He asked to confirm my name and birth date, noting everything carefully, and when he continued, his words landed with sharp precision. He told me there was no record of anyone named Melissa being admitted to Austin General the night before. My grip tightened on the counter, but I stayed silent as he moved on. He explained that Jason Whitman had been taken into custody after an accident downtown involving a rented sports car. The rental agreement listed an address previously associated with me, and that single detail shifted the entire direction of the call. He asked if I had authorized Jason to use my information for that rental. I felt the question hit before I could form an answer. I managed to ask what exactly had happened. Officer Brennan explained that Jason lost control of the car and crashed into a concrete barrier, causing substantial damage. The rental company filed a report immediately, and because my address was on the paperwork, the police needed clarity on whether I had given permission. My voice sounded distant even to myself when I told him no, I had not authorized anything. He repeated the question slower this time, making sure I understood the seriousness of my response. I confirmed it again. Only then did he note it officially. He informed me that the bail amount for Jason had been set at $14,000. I didn't know what emotion was supposed to follow a sentence like that. Shock, anger, fear. All I felt was a strange heaviness, as if someone had rested a hand against my chest and refused to move it. Officer Brennan explained what the next steps would be, what I might need to provide if the rental company pursued further action, and what would happen during Jason's processing. I thanked him for the call, though the words barely formed. When the line disconnected, the silence in the room felt sharper than anything he had said. The coffee beside me had gone cold, untouched. The morning light felt harsher than usual, hitting everything with a clarity I didn't want. I couldn't understand how Jason had even accessed anything tied to me anymore. I had moved, changed documents, built my own life. And yet somehow, my information had still ended up in his hands. For a moment, I couldn't move. The weight of it was too sudden, too real. I wasn't sure how anyone else would react to discovering their own brother had used their personal information like that. But I just stood there, feeling like the ground had vanished under my feet. People always say family wouldn't dare cross certain lines, but within an hour, Melissa proved that idea was nothing more than wishful thinking. I knew something was wrong when my notifications climbed so fast the screen froze, and when it finally loaded, the first thing I saw was her face filling the frame of a video, red eyes, quivering voice, perfectly angled lighting. She claimed her own sister had abandoned her in a hospital, leaving her to fight through the pain alone. She didn't speak my name yet. Every word pointed straight at me, like it had been rehearsed. Beneath the video was a photograph that made my stomach knot. Melissa sat on a hospital bed wrapped in a blanket, an IV taped to her arm. At first glance, it looked authentic, but when I zoomed in, tiny details broke the illusion. The IV line wasn't connected to anything, the bracelet digits were smudged, and the background didn't match Austin General at all. Still, none of that mattered online. Viewers absorbed it instantly and reacted even faster. Comments exploded, people rushing to defend her without questioning a single detail. Strangers reposted the image with captions condemning me, some digging up old pictures from years ago and pairing them with accusations they invented on the spot. My phone vibrated nonstop, the messages blending together into a wall of hostility. I could barely process one before 10 more arrived, each more vicious than the last. Seeing all of it unfold so quickly had a strange effect on me. It wasn't anger at first, it was disbelief. Something cold and hollow, like standing outside myself and watching someone else's life get dismantled by people who didn't even know my voice. Then Hannah texted. She asked if I was seeing what was circulating. Her message came through clean and quiet amid the chaos, which somehow made it hit harder. She included a screenshot where Melissa's video had been reshared by accounts completely outside our social circle. My chest tightened. If it had reached that far, it wasn't just personal drama anymore, it was public damage. I replied briefly, saying the posts weren't real and that Melissa wasn't in any hospital. Hannah didn't question me, but her tone sharpened instantly. "Dana, this could affect your job. Public accusations like that can spread fast. If she's using your name indirectly, it's serious." I stared at her message, feeling the room shrink around me. Of all people, Hannah was the one who stayed calm under pressure, so the fact that she sounded alarmed made the situation feel heavier. I opened the video again, this time paying attention not to her tears but to the structure of the scene, how she paused before speaking, how she glanced off camera as if checking her performance, how the blanket draped over her matched a stock photo I remembered seeing once. The realization landed slowly. She hadn't posted in anger. She had posted deliberately. She had chosen to orchestrate a narrative where I was the villain because it benefited her. The comments kept climbing, people stitching her video with their own outrage, inventing scenarios where I had supposedly mistreated her for years. It was surreal watching entire stories develop around a lie, each person adding another layer of invention. Through all of it, one thought repeated quietly in the back of my mind, not fear of their judgment, but the sharp understanding that whatever relationship had existed between me and Melissa no longer meant anything. She had crossed a line she didn't plan on stepping back from, and the moment I saw that fabricated hospital picture, I knew exactly what that meant. The call started with no hesitation, as if they had been rehearsing the script before dialing. Kevin's voice barreled through the speaker, thick with disappointment, demanding to know how I could turn my back on my own family. Valerie followed immediately, saying she barely recognized the person I had become. Their words came fast, layered with guilt and accusation, giving me no room to even breathe, but I waited until their momentum ran out before speaking. "Why did you tell me Melissa was in the hospital?" The question landed with a weight that neither of them addressed at first. Valerie murmured something about panic, about how emotions were high, and details got mixed up. But she wandered around the point without touching it. Kevin cut in, insisting I was focusing on the wrong thing, that the bigger issue needed my attention. I repeated the question slow and sharp, and this time their silence stretched long enough that I knew the truth was finally coming. Kevin eventually muttered that Melissa wasn't exactly in the hospital. He said it flat without shame, as if revising the story was a minor correction, rather than a calculated lie. Valerie jumped in to cushion it, saying everything had escalated because of Jason, that they had been scared and overwhelmed. Their words had the softness people use when they're trying to make something ugly sound accidental. As they continued, the truth slipped out piece by piece. Jason had been the one in real trouble. They knew it. They had known it the entire time. Yet somehow, they expected me to absorb the fallout without knowing what I was being dragged into. Once his name surfaced, the tone shifted again. The lie about Melissa vanished from the conversation as if it had never existed. They painted Jason as a young man who had simply made a poor choice, someone who deserved understanding rather than consequences. They insisted people his age mess up and shouldn't be punished harshly for it. Their language smoothed over everything, his actions reduced to a moment, his decisions framed as stress, induced, his behavior excused as temporary. Then, as if following a well-worn path they had used many times before, their approach turned from minimizing to pleading. Valerie said they couldn't carry this burden alone, that without my help they would be ruined. Kevin insisted Jason needed a chance to fix things, that denying him that chance would break the family apart. Every sentence folded into the next, layering pressure on me until it felt suffocating. They didn't ask what this would cost me. They didn't ask how it would affect my life. They only talked about what they stood to lose. When I finally asked, "And what about my future?" the silence that followed was immediate and startling. It was the kind of silence that reveals truth without saying anything. When Kevin finally responded, his tone was clipped, telling me I was being dramatic. Valerie whispered that they didn't understand how I could stand by and watch them struggle, calling my refusal unthinkable. Blame settled back over the conversation like a familiar blanket. They tried to make me responsible for everything: Jason's choices, their panic, the possible fallout. Their voices wove together in a chorus of disappointment, frustration, and expectation, but underneath all of it was something colder. They didn't want my help. They expected it. The realization hit me with a clarity I hadn't felt before. They weren't trying to save the family. They were trying to keep the version of it where my life existed to protect everyone but me. I didn't know exactly what I expected to find, but the moment I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, something in me braced for impact. The morning still felt heavy, thick with unanswered questions, and as I logged into the credit reports connected to my parents' household, the numbers unfolded like a confession they had never spoken aloud. At first, I thought the system was glitching, showing data that didn't make sense. 2 separate home equity loans had been taken out under Kevin and Valerie's names, each reflecting substantial withdrawals. The descriptions listed them as debt consolidation loans, but the repayment pattern pointed to something entirely different. The funds were funneled into accounts tied to Jason's financial footprint, and once I sorted the transactions by date, the truth became disturbingly clear. These weren't household emergencies or medical bills or anything resembling necessity. They coincided with moments in Jason's life when he boasted about new opportunities, sudden travel plans, or investments he claimed were going to pay off big. I remembered how my parents always insisted he was finding his path, even when his choices made no sense. Now the financial trail showed exactly how much of that so-called path had been paved with money taken against the house they acted like they were protecting. My chest tightened as I clicked into his associated accounts. The list of small loans staggered me, not just a few impulsive mistakes, but dozens of scattered borrowing attempts from online lenders, each overdue, each growing worse with interest. The progression was unmistakable. Borrow, ignore, delay, repeat. Every detail built a timeline of someone spiraling financially while the rest of us were kept in the dark. The deeper I went, the more my own memories surfaced uninvited. I thought about Melissa occasionally showing up at my apartment claiming she had no groceries or that something came up, and she needed a few $100s to hold her over. She always framed it as temporary, always said she'd pay me back. But the repayment never came, and somehow I always ended up apologizing for making her feel bad. The emotional weight of those years suddenly made sense when viewed through the lens of these numbers. They weren't isolated favors or one-off requests. They were symptoms of a family system built on expecting me to fix the holes everyone else created. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of the spiral. It was Hannah. She had been keeping an eye on me ever since Melissa's online stunt, but now she simply asked if I'd learned anything new. I hesitated before typing a summary of what I'd uncovered, not every detail, just enough to explain why my hands had gone cold. When she responded, her tone wasn't shocked. It was steady, the way someone sounds when they've seen this pattern before. She told me that what I was describing wasn't just thoughtlessness or poor judgment. It was financial exploitation, a form of long-term manipulation that often hides behind family loyalty and guilt. Her clarity hit harder than the numbers themselves. She reminded me that I had the right to set boundaries, and that identity misuse was something I could legally protect myself against if I chose to. The idea of involving a lawyer felt traumatic, yet the more I considered the evidence on my screen, the more reasonable it seemed. These weren't harmless mistakes. They were decisions made repeatedly, knowingly, with full trust that I would absorb the consequences. As the weight of that realization settled, it became impossible to deny the truth staring back at me. This wasn't about one chaotic night or one bad decision. It was a long-standing pattern that had shaped my entire role in the family, a pattern I hadn't recognized because I'd been too busy cleaning up the fallout to see what caused it. For the first time, I understood exactly what had been taken from me and how long it had been happening. The unraveling of everything my family had tried to hide became undeniable the moment the foreclosure notice appeared on their front door. It was printed on stiff paper, neon orange, the kind of color chosen specifically so no one could ignore it, and the bank had taped it right across the center of the wooden frame, like a final verdict. Within hours, the neighborhood responded exactly the way American suburbs always do when something dramatic happens close to home. People slowed their cars as they drove past. Someone walking their dog took a little longer than necessary near the curb. A pair of teenagers rode their bikes by twice, pretending not to look, while staring directly at the notice. And the neighbors, who prided themselves on minding their own business, stood in their driveway murmuring to each other, trading theories about what must have gone wrong. Meanwhile, Kevin and Valerie pretended not to notice the stares, but the shame clung to them in every stiff movement, every hurried step to the car, every time they avoided eye contact. While that was happening, Jason's situation took its own sharp turn. His hearing resulted in mandatory community supervision, forcing him into weekly check-ins and court-assigned service hours. The judge suspended his license for 2 full years because of the rented sports car he wrecked, and he was warned that any slip-up could escalate things quickly. He tried reaching out to Cole Hadley, the same friend he always used as proof that he was never alone, but Cole vanished completely. He didn't answer texts, didn't return calls, and removed Jason from group chats. It became obvious that Cole had no interest in being associated with legal trouble, leaving Jason to face the fallout entirely on his own. Melissa, on the other hand, was hid in a way she never anticipated. After the staged hospital story and her dramatic online video claiming she had been abandoned, several viewers reported her for posting misleading images. The platform reviewed her content and flagged her account for manipulated media. Her profile was locked, comments disabled, and she spent the next few days messaging everyone she knew with long rants about haters ruining her life. She didn't acknowledge the harm she caused or the people she misled. She only focused on how the consequences inconvenienced her. Then the hardest blow landed on Kevin and Valerie. With their credit ruined by the loans they had taken out for years to cover Jason's financial mess, they were no longer able to refinance their mortgage. The bank rejected every request for reconsideration, citing delinquent accounts and excessive debt. They were forced to move quickly, packing decades of belongings into boxes and relocating to a cramped rental apartment far from their old neighborhood. The downgrade was so drastic that even they couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. And yet, even with everything collapsing, they still found a way to make me responsible. Their voicemails held no reflection, no accountability, only accusation. They said I let the family fall apart. They insisted none of this would have happened if I had helped when they needed me. They clung so tightly to their version of events that they couldn't see the reality staring them in the face. These were consequences born from their choices, not mine. When the final message came, filled with the same tired blame and emotional pressure, something settled quietly inside me. I didn't feel anger or guilt or conflict, just clarity. I tapped the screen, blocked every number, and watched my call list go still. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't frightening. It was relief. Freedom didn't arrive with fanfare. It arrived quietly on a warm Houston morning when I unlocked the door to my new Midtown apartment and stepped inside, carrying nothing that didn't truly belong to me. The space was empty in a way that felt intentional, a blank canvas waiting for choices that were mine alone. I set down the first box, feeling its weight leave my hands, and for a moment I just stood there listening to the stillness that didn't demand anything from me. As I began arranging the furniture I had picked out, every movement felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. I tightened screws on a coffee table, hung floating shelves with a level I borrowed from a neighbor, and opened new curtains that let in generous afternoon light. None of these tasks were particularly difficult, but doing them without interruption, without tension, humming in the background made them feel extraordinary. Halfway through assembling a lamp, I heard a familiar knock. When I opened the door, Hannah stood in the hallway with paint swatches in one hand and iced coffees in the other, as if she had known exactly what I needed before I did. She stepped inside with the ease of someone who cared without condition and started holding swatches against the wall, asking whether I wanted something warm or something bright. We spent hours like that laughing about my questionable taste in chairs, reorganizing the bookshelf. 3 different ways, arguing playfully about where the mirror should go. It wasn't the help itself that mattered. It was the feeling of being supported rather than drained. When she left that evening promising to come back with plants because every new space needs at least 2, I realized my life finally included people who added to it instead of taking from it. The next morning, sunlight hit the fresh white walls and made the whole apartment glow. I sat on the edge of my bed, looked at my phone, and opened the settings. My old number stared back at me, a number tied to years of panic calls, accusations, guilt expectations, and emotional ambushes. Changing it didn't feel like erasing a part of my life. It felt like closing a door that should never have been left open. I entered the new number, confirmed it, and watched the old one disappear. Then I shut down every remaining channel that could lead back to the past, social notifications, old email threads, anything that still connected me to a version of myself defined by survival instead of choice. When I finished, the silence felt different. Not hollow, not waiting, just peaceful. That evening, I went for a walk through Midtown, feeling the hum of the city around me. Restaurants spilled laughter onto the sidewalks, couples wandered hand in hand beneath the streetlights, and the warm Houston air carried hints of food trucks stationed around the corner. I walked without urgency, without the instinct to check my phone, without bracing for someone else's crisis. My steps felt lighter with every block I crossed, as if the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming stretched gently but unmistakably. For the first time in years, my future didn't feel like a burden to anticipate. It felt wide open. When I returned home and locked the door, I stood in the quiet of my new apartment and let the moment settle. The life I had known, the one shaped by constant fixing, constant sacrificing, constant bracing, was over because I chose to end it, not because someone forced my hand. And as everything finally stilled, one truth rooted itself so firmly inside me that I knew it would never be shaken again. Love is not a string of invoices, and I was not born to be anyone's lifeline ever again. Thank you all for taking the time to watch the video. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos.